And I'm really pleased to introduce our speaker, Evan Epperson. And a little bit in terms of Evan, got a design certificate in 2019 from the Permaculture Institute, completed and certified to teach permaculture by the Permaculture Institute. He's a permaculture designer with Interdependent Web LLC, teaches, and he's a board member, Kansas Permaculture Institute. He manages an annual garden and food forest on his own quarter-acre property. And when his hands are not in the dirt, he writes, records music that are published under his own name on all streaming services. So, kind of a permaculture renaissance man here. Welcome, and thanks for joining us.
All right, good morning, everybody. Thank you for having me. All right. That was a pretty good introduction, no notes. So I would just say that I found my way to this kind of lifestyle in a roundabout way. I didn't grow up working in gardens. Neither of my parents had extensive gardens or anything like that, but I spent a lifetime in the restaurant industry. And you spend that much time around food, you eventually get curious about where it comes from. And boy, is it scary. All right, so I want to approach the topic today just by giving a brief introduction to the way I think about these things, which is, of course, permaculture, as in everything that he read about me had permaculture in the word, in the name, one way or another. It's a philosophical basis for how I choose to act. Permaculture is a set of ethics and principles that allow us to design human settlements that provide for all human needs, as well as acting as a form of ecosystem. And okay, now they can hear me a little bit. I haven't really said anything important yet. Okay, so any decision that I'm going to make in my garden is going to pass through this filter of the ethics and principles. And I won't say all the principles right now. I have some pamphlets if you're curious about what is to be said about each one of those. But I think observe and interact is our most important one because it allows us to be part of the ecosystem. We are our ecosystem's keystone species. It is missing our partnership. All we do right now is roll over it. So I think there's a common idea in the world that humans are bad for the environment in general. Well, yeah, depending on how we act, but we're also very important to the environment as far as propagating life, which I think is the purpose of life, really. So moving on, what does that look like? Permaculture is famous for food forests. And the food forest idea is based around the idea of biomimicry, which is to look at how the natural world operates. It's often very efficient. So we want to look at how nature is able to produce food for an incredible amount of life without all of the plowing or any of the linear systems that humans impose upon it. And so the ways that we do that are looking at the 7 layers of the forest. The forest has an architecture of different kinds of plants that spread out over the ground, that grow down into the soil, that climb up the trees, and so forth. It's a recognition that relationships between individuals in that ecosystem community are more important than what the element of design is itself. You have an apple tree, but in your design for an apple tree, its interaction with other species is often more important to the overall health of the ecosystem. And we design around that fact. These are meant to be low maintenance. And because nature takes care of itself mostly without our intervention, right? But it may not end up being something that produces a whole lot of food or fiber for us. So, our intervention is necessary to make the ecosystem give us something in return, but also we want it to be just something that you can go out and not have to put a lot of work into maintaining. Food forests, disease and pest resistance. I think that most natural ecosystems with their diversity of different species and all of the kind of chemical warfare that happens on a biological level creates this sort of balance in the chaos that reduces pest and disease pressure considerably. These food forests build their own soil. If you're a gardener, you've probably trucked in some compost. You've probably dug it out of somewhere or brought in manure or something like that to increase the fertility of your vegetable garden. Well, a food forest is really creating that for itself in the action of deciduous trees. They dig down into the soil, bring their micronutrients up into the leaves. They drop their leaves and then leave it on the topsoil, and then that becomes part of the topsoil. They are soil builders. And there's not just trees that do that. There are lots of species that we call dynamic accumulators, and hot tip dandelion's one of them. So also the ability to create microclimates is really important. Now, we can kind of with the action that a tree takes on its surroundings in cooling the area under it, in slowing down rain and preventing erosion, in building topsoil and all of these things, you can actually create little environments where certain species can thrive even though they may not fit into the typical USDA zone. The most famous example of this is probably, left my water over here, is probably Sepp Holzer's food forest in the Austrian Alps, where he has created a microclimate system on a mountainside with a pond. In between those things, he's able to grow citrus trees in the Alps. All right. So how does that translate into the vegetable garden? Well, oh boy. It seems to be plugged in. Is it not?
I got batteries.
Okay. Well, I don't want this to die on us, but I think that's
Right, it's
yeah.
plugged in.
Maybe I'm asking too much of it. Can't charge fast enough. Okay, wait, back up. So translating into the vegetable garden, we kind of want to transfer a lot of these ideas into our vegetable garden, designing with different architecture in mind, the different shapes of plants and how can we fit them all together to act more in partnership and create, or reduce labor and things like that, reducing our inputs, reducing our labor, and also building that pest and disease pressure resistance by treating a vegetable garden much the same as we do those food forests. So how are we going to do that? There's a few different garden practices here that we apply to the situation. Effective planning is one of them. And I think it's probably pretty difficult for a novice to start reading about these ideas and putting them into practice in any effective way. I tried for sure. But you end up making a lot of mistakes. And so if you don't know something about a vegetable's full life cycle, how big it gets when it's going to seed, things like that, how long each one of these crops takes to reach maturity. If you don't have a lot of experience with that, then it's tough to design an effective system because it's always changing on you, right? It's, a plant's never the same size one day to the next. And so that changes the situation. One of our permaculture luminaries here in this country, Paul Wheaton, says that you have to be really smart to be this lazy. And so, we're trying to minimize soil disturbance, and we never want to leave bare soil. Those are two things that we would categorize under soil, maintaining soil health, minimizing the disturbance, because anytime you, put a disc in or turn it over in the double digging style or something like that, you're taking it's like dropping a nuclear bomb on a city of creatures that are trying to subsist and make their life out of that soil, and you just wreck it and expect them to do everything again in a just a little season, one growing season. So, the more we understand about microbiology in the soil and things like that, the more it seems like it's in a little underground economy. Plants are pumping their carbon sugars into their roots and feeding these little bacterium who run out and find minerals to trade with the plant for those carbon sugars. It's a complex web of interactivity that we really do destroy if we are too invasive in our management techniques. And same thing with bare soil. If the top level of that city is just baked by the sun and is losing all of its water and stuff like that, then we can't be nearly as effective. Polyculture is one of the ways that we achieve this. That is planting multiple different species of plants together. It doesn't have to necessarily be vegetables. Can be some of our medicinal flowers, can be some of our pollinator-friendly plants, can be perennials. And so polyculture is a way to increase our diversity, which, as we've talked about already, kind of increases our disease and pest resistance. And we're thinking about how many crops and non-crop plants can we put into this situation to fill all the ecological niches. And those ecological niches we'll get more into detail here later on. But so these are the things we're going to talk about here coming up. So for planning an ecological garden, we're going to think about the puzzle in a few different ways. We're going to determine the requirements of our plants, thinking about what can produce in part shade, what can spend more of its time out in the bright sunshine, what has more water requirements, like a celery, compared to something that tolerates a little more dry soil, like basil. What kind of soil type are you working with? I know me, I've got nothing but clay. So we're going to try and replace irrigation with earthworks and deep mulch. So that's, it's not 100% successful. You still have to water when it gets to be July and August in Kansas, but we try to move water across our landscape and put it where it needs to be in the soil, so that we don't have to think about it later on. I have rainwater harvesting setups that overflow into trenches in the middle of my garden. My patio runs off into a trench just short of my blackberries. There are other trenches dug throughout the yard that kind of control water as it flows across my landscape and infiltrate it into the soil. And the more biologically active the yard becomes, the more it can infiltrate that rain on its own without having to capture it in the trench. It used to be, when I started out, it was perfectly flat green grass. And well, not perfectly flat. I still had a slope to work with, but the water would start to run after half an inch of rain. But now it's got to be well in excess of an inch before I start to notice water running in my yard. So those plants and the soil has developed the ability to infiltrate more rainwater, and so that I don't have to water as much. And deep mulch, of course, we want to make sure that the soil is covered, but also be able to retain all that moisture. And that's how we build our soil too in the vegetable garden. That's what a tree is doing when it's building its leaves throughout the year and dropping them down onto the ground. It's building a soil layer that is more that is promoting its own sort of soil type that it wants to be in. So by using appropriate mulch, I think that I've gotten into trouble maybe a little bit using too much tree-based mulch in my vegetable garden. It's kind of acidified the soil a little bit, and I've had to make adjustments to move that back. So if you can focus more on the grassland types of mulch, I think it's more appropriate in the garden if you're going to be building soil out of that stuff. We're going to manage relationships. So like I said, all of these elements that you want to put into your garden, I want to have tomatoes, I want to have onions, those things are pretty much one-dimensional to us when we think about them normally. I plant a tomato, I get a tomato out of it. But what is it doing in the whole 6 months that it's growing in your garden, and how is it interacting with these other species? We want to think about this stuff. And those ecological functions I mentioned, we need to think about how we can get nitrogen fixers into the soil to take atmospheric nitrogen and put it into the soil in partnership with bacteria. Those dynamic accumulators that I mentioned, the soil builders, dandelion, comfrey. Comfrey is the permaculturist's favorite plant, and just because of the way it digs down into the subsoil and can be chopped back so often and just laid down as a mulch to build soil. We want to make sure that we've got shelter and forage for insects. There is a very healthy population of predator insects in my garden because I plant all of these diverse crops, and B, I don't chop them down at the end of the year. I don't mulch them or anything like that until the next spring. There are a lot of hollow stems and things like that that bugs will inhabit over the winter time and keep them sheltered. And a lot of those standing flower heads and things like that are forage for birds throughout the rest of the winter. Non-migratory birds that are hanging out need something to be able to go after. And so I've still got bird forage standing until the early part of spring. So you can see here, if Microsoft Paint was around in the Renaissance, I would have been counted among the Dutch masters, I'm sure. But it's just I just wanted to show a quick little example about soil health here. And most of our garden crops really don't have robust root systems. They have, they go down 6-8 inches. Some of them maybe send out some really long runners or stuff like that, but they don't really penetrate very deeply very often. And so that's kind of exemplified there on the left. And on the right, if you're thinking about a diversity of root zone styles of growing, I guess you would say, then you have a lot more access to subsoil nutrients. That economy becomes more robust. Those bacteria are able to access more and different kinds of minerals and things to give to your plants. So I always try and think about what kind of roots am I planting next to each other and how are they going to be able to occupy the different zones. Yeah, diversity is the key to the robust economy underground. I like to also think of it this way, which is like a bacterium in the soil is living in its environment, and sure, there are little worm tunnels and aggregate channels created by other microbiota and macrobiota. And so you can maybe get around or something like that, but your food, what you really need to eat are those carbon sugars created by plants from the sun. And so you're on one side of the wall, and the only way to get through it, or the only way for the food to get to you, is for that plant to grow through it and send its root right to you. Yeah, nothing more to say about that. Okay, the polyculture, that's growing lots of different plants together in one area. Diversity, we feel, is strength, and it adds to the pest and disease resistance. It makes it more resilient. And what I mean by resilient is it's also resilient for you. If you put all of your effort into a single kind of crop, like, well, I just really need a lot of potatoes, and you get a serious issue with those potatoes, whether it's potato bugs or some sort of fungus or something like that, then you're out of a food source for a whole year. And if you have a diversity of different crops growing, then if something is happening to one of your crops, then it's not what you're dependent upon. And I suppose this is more, a target at like industrial agriculture. Monocrops are a bad thing to place a bet on, unless you want to spend a lot of money on spray. And then the preponderance of relationships is a benefit to the system too, because a lot of these are beneficial relationships. We'll see just in this next slide here. This is a chart that I just hand drew based on the book Carrots Love Tomatoes, which is a lot of observational evidence, not a lot of it's hard science necessarily. And a lot of people look at the negative relationships in their garden and say, well, I do that and it's fine, which is often the case. But just look at how many beneficial relationships there are compared to how many negative relationships there have been observed in gardens. They're just not, that's the point, that mostly nature is about cooperation. Back to this here now. This chart on the right here is from Edible Forest Gardens, a book that I brought for you to look through if you'd like to. And it's just a mathematical exploration of how many relationships there are in a system as you start adding elements to the system. There's only one relationship between two plants, but as soon as you add a third plant, then there's 3 relationships, and so on and so forth down there until you get 28 relationships between just 8 plants in a polyculture. And, you know, based on this, maybe one of them's negative, but is it going to make a difference? Maybe not. And so there's just a little bit here I want to say about some studies that have been done recently about some of this stuff. There was a 2022 meta-analysis done by new phytologists that looked at intercropping effects on soil-borne pests and diseases. And this is mostly in the UK, by the way, but this is part of the National Libraries of Medicine. And I found this in. There's 40% reduction in nematode damage and 55% reduction in disease incidence. And that partnership between, here's another study that was a partnership between tomato and potato onion showed an increase in resistance to the verticillium wilt. So, you know, there's a few of those I collected, but the evidence is mounting, thankfully, very maybe more with European and British establishments, more so than we're studying that here, but it is becoming more proven. So diversity of underground structures, right? We want to achieve that in our vegetable garden. It's pretty tough to do that with vegetable crops since they all have different kinds of roots. But you can achieve that kind of diversity with perennial plants. They grow year on year, they get bigger, they grow deeper, and they can build that soil in there. And these are some examples of different styles of roots that you see mostly in trees. Flat roots there, like your maple tree. There's a taproot, like a lot of our weeds, you know, particularly like sunflower, dandelion. Those are strongly taprooted, and they're trying to get down and break up compaction in the soil. Yeah, I think this really supercharges soil biology. I always notice a difference in beds that I have something where a perennial is growing nearby and I cover cropped it over the winter, compared to beds that I just left mulch on with nothing nearby. I mean, the color is evident as soon as you uncover it in the spring, and all the worms are hanging out where the plants are. So perennials in the garden, they are pretty low maintenance, you know, mostly if you're choosing orchard fruit tree varieties, sure, you've got to do some pruning to keep them good, but still that's once a year maybe that you're doing that, and another time in the year you're harvesting, maybe taking some measures to protect your fruit from the squirrels. But other than that, you know, compared to vegetable gardening, the perennial yields are pretty easy to obtain. And you don't have to think about it after you decide where to put it the next year. You know, it doesn't become part of your planning anymore. You just say, well, that's where it is, and what can I plant next to it? There's a high likelihood of harvest once established. You know, a lot of these, I've never really had exceptional failure when it came to any of my perennial choices. They do provide bird forage and habitat throughout the year, as well as invertebrate shelter and nectary. And the soil benefits from always having something alive. That action of leaves photosynthesizing, creating carbon sugar, sending that down into the roots. Well, you know, that still kind of continues, albeit in a very much smaller way, but throughout the winter. I think that's why all my worms hang out around those perennial plants and those cover crops that have growing roots in the ground, because there's still an exchange happening, as opposed to that ground that's just mulched over where, you know, there's nothing for them to eat. So here are some examples of some perennial vegetables that you can include in your garden. The first one on the left is known as Jerusalem artichoke, which is a horribly misleading name. It's neither from Jerusalem nor is it an artichoke. They think, people who study the origins of words, they think that came from a misunderstanding of the Italian word for sunflower, which is girasole. So girasole into Jerusalem, and then artichoke. Still don't see the resemblance. That's a tuber that grows underneath the ground, underneath this sunflower, which has the potential to get 14 feet tall. So it makes a wonderful screen plant if you need just a place where you can put a border up without having to put a fence. Jerusalem artichoke is a great option. It does die back to the ground every year, so it's not a fence in winter. But the wonderful thing about that is it's a survival crop. you can put that in and not think about it again until you're hungry. And those tubers exist in the ground mostly. I mean, if you're growing it the first year, they're going to be there in fall, not until fall, but then after that, dig them up anytime the ground's not frozen in winter and eat those. I will say, unfortunately, they have the name fartichoke as well. They have inulin in them, which is non-digestible plant-based sugar that is good for diabetics as an alternative to things like potatoes, but it can lead to lots of people being gassy. Yeah, Helianthus tuberosa is the scientific name on that one. I'm sure everyone knows the one on the right, but maybe you haven't tried to grow it. I'm still in my first few years of growing it. And asparagus does pretty well in partnership with tomatoes. Tomatoes are reputed to have the ability to, with their distinct smell, to ward off asparagus beetles. And asparagus beetles do become an issue. I found that out this year. And kind of their young defoliate the plant. But asparagus is a great kind of set it and forget it sort of crop. You have, if you plant it from seed, you'll be harvesting within 3 years. If you plant a crown, you could probably harvest a few stems the next year, but if you could get it full steam ahead after the second year. And it's just a lovely addition to the garden and gives some upward architecture. If you have something that's it's got really tiny leaves to it, so it doesn't really shade what's behind it that much, and you could always kind of prune if you needed to. So when you think about these things and how they might provide a beneficial microclimate to another plant, asparagus is a good one. It casts some shade, but not a lot. Doesn't take up a whole lot of spreading room, but it could shade something like lettuce and allow you to harvest your lettuce crop or prevent it from bolting later into the year if it's positioned appropriately. Word of warning on the Jerusalem artichoke, I just remembered that one's pretty, you got to harvest it or you're going to get it everywhere. So it's one of those spreaders for sure. Here is a walking onion on the left, or Egyptian walking onion, or tree onion. These are onions that grow just perennially, and they put a cluster of bulbils on the top, which are little onions that once they make the onion too heavy, they just fall over and they walk across your garden, hence the name, year over year. I find that they're one of the first things to come up in my garden in late winter, which is really awesome to go out and have fresh green onions in late February. They don't put on much of a bulb, but you can still harvest, pull them all the way out and cut those off. Or I just like to cut the leaves and just throw those as a garnish on or to get that onion flavor when I've run out of bulbs. And yeah, that one spreads, but it's pretty easily manageable. It takes one step a year, so you can stay ahead of it. And then the one on the right here, I figured everybody knew what rhubarb looked like, but this is a picture of a cross section of the roots of rhubarb out of this Edible Forest Gardens book, and just how incredible. And look at that. There's your scale down there, 1 foot. I can't even count those. I think it's 15 feet down. And I'm sure that was grown in an environment probably with less clay than we have. And it might have, just for experiments purposes, they might have put it in a glass case with loose soil and stuff like that. But still, it's incredible, isn't it? Imagine imagine all the resources it's scavenging down there, putting into its leaves year over year. And then, a lot of these things, they die back in the winter. So even if you don't chop and drop it to make it a mulch, it's still making a topsoil layer every year if you just let it die naturally when the frost comes. And this last one here on the left is probably pretty rare still, but it was exceptionally popular all the way back to Roman times in Europe. It was written about by I think it was Emperor Tiberius's favorite vegetable. It's called skirret, and skirret is a plant that grows about 6 feet tall in kind of a bushing habit, so about as tall as me, and then it puts all these thick, crunchy roots on at the bottom, which were often used as a kind of the same way carrots are. So you could dig down on one side of the plant, kind of grab some of those crunchy roots and just replace the soil, and the plant will keep on growing just fine. So sweet, crunchy, just like a carrot. Absolutely awesome. I have tried to grow it. I haven't been successful yet, but some more options here on the right. Daylily is completely edible, all parts of it. In Asia, the little buds of the flower are, oh, there's one back there. The little buds that aren't open are kind of picked and used as a vegetable, like a green bean. The flower petals can be picked off and tossed into a salad, and eaten raw like that. They're often, battered and fried too, as a nice little tasty treat. And you can even pull the whole plant and sort of cut the white parts at the bottom and eat it sort of like a green onion. So, lots of people have huge stands of those things. And, I always like to keep remember that. It's like, oh, if I need something to eat, I know where to find it. And they don't know. Sorrel is a great example of kitchen herb, salad edition, excellent, grows year over year there. Sea kale is a perennial kale, obviously native to coastal environments, but it does okay pretty much wherever you grow it, up to, I think it's hardy down to zone 3. And Crown Bay Maritima is what that one is in scientific name. Perpetual spinach, a little bit of a misnomer there. It perpetually gives you spinach throughout the year, but it is only a biennial. Still the same, if you designate areas for some of these vegetables, they can perennialize, even if they are annuals or biennials, just by allowing them to go through their full life cycle. And I did that recently with this perpetual spinach, which is more like green chard, just not colorful chard. And it grew to a height about as tall as me, laid down seed, and it replanted itself without me having to do anything. Which is awesome. It's a great partner in my strawberry patch right now, if I can rescue it from the lemon balm. And the last one, Malabar spinach. I haven't had any experience with this other than down at the Light Center. They have some growing in a hoop house down there outside of Baldwin. And they love it for goat feed. They love it for wintertime greens. It can be perennial and harvestable throughout much of the year. So all good options there. I brought another book with me, which I got a lot of these references from by Eric Tonesmeyer. It's just perennial vegetables. And there's about 100 of them in there. So I gave you just a small selection of what I thought would do best here. But there are lots of options. Please. I think that one's a perennial. I haven't grown it, so I'm not exactly sure, but I think that it grows perennially here. And I could be wrong. Oh, very nice. Yeah.
Here and it dies, but
Okay.
it will feed itself.
Okay, so maybe that's why they have it at the.
Got red stems, and then so it's a aesthetically pleasing plant as well as you can eat it.
Well, okay, that explains why they had it growing in the hoop house at the Light Center when I did see it. Okay, all right. Well, thank you for the input. So, perennial vegetables aren't the only option. Fruit absolutely belongs in your vegetable garden in a couple of different options here. Passiflora incarnata, the maypop or passion flower, is hardy in this zone if you are able to mulch it appropriately. Mine grows close to the house, so it has the benefit of the residual heat from the house, the thermal battery of the concrete and stuff like that there to keep it alive. But we certainly can. It's, I think, probably listed as zone 7, but we can definitely grow it here with a little microclimate action. And then on the right here, gooseberries and currants. Golden currants are native. Of course, it's the European relative that we grow for the harvestable variety, but gooseberries also an excellent alternative. Doesn't, they have thorns on them, so maybe not in the spot where you're going to have to walk by them all the time, but just another thing to consider. But they're, a lot of these, they're not terribly large. They get about 6 feet tall, something like that. The passion flower will grow exceptionally large, but it kind of climbs up the whole side of my house. On the left, sorry. I've never tried to trim it, but I probably will have to this year because that's about to climb into my window unit. Yeah. But no, I don't think that it, I think it's got enough underground, it's kind of a suckering habit, right? I planted it in one space and it's coming up in probably 6 different places now. And so if you cut one stem, I think you'd still have plenty of space for flowers. Yes.
Passion flower, I planted it last year, and then in the spring, I waited and waited and waited, and then I'm like, what a fail. So then I started seeds, and then I plant, and now I only have this tiny strip that it's in, and it's like a, so can I transplant that, or doesn't it?
I haven't tried to move mine yet, but I think that it probably would be pretty vigorous from some cuttings as long as you got roots in there. Yeah, and yeah, be patient in the springtime. It takes a while to come up. I don't really notice mine until May, about when the milkweeds and stuff like that are coming up. And then it still doesn't get very big until about now when the heat hits. Yeah. So here, these are a couple of bigger options, but they can be managed as far as their size goes. The left is serviceberry, which is a native fruit in North America. It's got lots of different cultivars, some that are grown for their floral beauty and some that are grown for tasty fruit. And then lots that you can get from the Conservation Service that are just gonna be really healthy and have a nice erosion control sort of planting idea there. Really tasty fruit though, tastes like an apple flavored blueberry. It's lovely. And they're, as far as trees go, they're quite a bit smaller, maybe 12 feet wide, 16 feet tall maximum. So they can be controlled down to a single stem if you'd like, and kind of make it more of a tree habit. But in general, it would be suckering up from the crown most of the time. And same thing with elderberries. They have a similar structure and habit. That's elders on the right. 12 feet tall, 12 feet wide, suckering habit. And the maintenance there is just to take out older stems and kind of maintain the balance between old and new stems. And elderflower and elderberry, both incredibly medicinal. I make kombucha at home as well. Elderflower is a wonderful flavoring for that. Tastes just like Saint Germain. Yeah, it's, both of these are kind of edge zone plants. You'll always see them on the edge of riparian zones, controlling erosion in certain places, or growing at the edge of forest habitats. And they really need to be replacing that Amur honeysuckle, in those ecologies. Okay, there's some larger options there. So medicines are a big part of my garden. My wife in 2020 took an herbalism course because she was a teacher and she was bored at home. So we have a lot of respiratory herbs planted in our garden. I'm sure you can guess why. But really, they are part of what maintains such a pollinator-friendly habitat, I think, in our backyard. And you'll notice that some of these are weeds, what we consider weeds: dandelion, plantain, lemon balm, certainly for me. Mullein definitely comes up in a lot. Mullein comes up in a lot of pretty harsh environments, but a very helpful respiratory herb. And their flowers are good for ear infection, things like that. I just love all of these plants. They add such a richness to my garden, and they're all useful in one way or another. And as far as those weeds go, I think I had some other study to read to you about, but I've already mentioned dandelion is a dynamic accumulator. I've just, it's just anecdotal, but I've noticed that plants that grow in partnership with a dandelion are bigger than those that are just by themselves. And, the taproot of a dandelion does dig down there, and it's particularly good at accumulating calcium, which I know is something probably most of you have added to your tomatoes at some point. Let's see if I had something about weeds here. weeds can cover the ground. They add that living mulch to the situation. And, mulch is great to hold moisture and things like that, but is it feeding that soil biology? No, not really. There are, what do you call it? Saprophytic organisms like fungus and worms and stuff that are eating that mulch, but not supercharging the other biology that is useful for our crop plants. Let's see here. This one, a systematic review of 23 studies found that many weeds boost soil nutrient levels, particularly nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, calcium, magnesium, and organic matter. And deep-rooted species, particularly, and nitrogen-fixing weeds reduce nutrient leaching and feed the soil for subsequent crops. So to me, it's all about it's maintaining a balance, doing a dance with these things that are trying to grow in my garden. I kind of think that 75% of the yard I am just guiding rather than managing the space. And so a lot of those little weed plants, I'll just kind of each one make an assessment. Are you going to grow tall and shade out my crops, or are you going to stay low and just provide that ecosystem benefit? Or could you possibly, I'll pay attention to the insects that are on it. Are you going to be sheltering something that I want to be staying around in this garden? And just make the decision there. And it, of course, all of them before they go to seed, trying to take the majority of them out. And so that's really the weeding, or as I like to call it, species selection that I do these days. Here are the books that I used to mostly come up with this talk today. And I want to show you a couple more things before I take some more questions. So there, yeah, grab a picture real quick. I'm going to move on to the next slide here shortly. Okay, got it. Now, just a reminder, the Kansas Permaculture Institute holds workshops throughout the year on various permaculture topics, and we always do a full permaculture design course. Fall and spring semesters offered at KU, as well as a summer community course that we're in the middle of right now. In fact, tomorrow I leave for Heartland Farm out in near Great Bend. We're going to spend a weekend out there and talk about that 40-year-old permaculture installation out there.